Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and good evening. Thanks for joining us. I would like to extend a special welcome to people who aren't that familiar with Chase's Mill. If there are anybody this evening, it looks like a lot of familiar faces, so it's probably familiar to most of you. But anyway, glad to see all of you tonight. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Jonathan Botkin. I'm a mechanical engineer. I live in California and live with my wife, Amanda, and my son, Alex. And my grandfather was Heman Chase, and he owned Chase's Mill in East Alsted from 1936 until his death in 1988. As you may know, there's been a working water-powered mill on this site for the past 250 years. Chase's Mill was built on the site of the town's first grist mill, which was built in 1767. And while the structure has been through many iterations, the current building dates to 1910. Eventually, after Heman's death, it fell into disrepair. And in 2016, the Mill Hollow Heritage Association, a nonprofit, purchased the property and began to renovate it with the intention of opening it as a community, opening it to the community as a living museum, a gathering place, and as a center where children and adults could learn, tinker, and create. While we were scheduled to open this past summer, the pandemic changed that. And like so many others, we had to pivot. We began offering a series of virtual events in June, and we found that they have provided a meaningful way of connecting by exploring what it is that makes Chase's Mill and Mill Hollow a unique place for so many. Tonight, we continue that exploration by speaking with a few people who participated in shop classes taught by Heman and Edith. During the years that my grandfather owned the mill, it was many things to many people. The working water power system was a useful tool and also a fascinating learning experience for many visitors. Its large gathering room upstairs provided a location for all sorts of activities, such as square dances, poetry readings, Quaker meetings, space for looms for weaving, an apartment for people to live in the summer and for the brave in the winter, many other things. Sometime in the late 1950s, Heman and my grandmother Edith started holding woodshop classes for kids. I was going to say spending their summers in Alsted, but just before this learned that actually some were in the winter. Yeah. Classes were generally 5 to 6 girls and boys at a time. Students were able to make things out of wood, of varying complexity, from small model boats to fairly large pieces of furniture. Personally, I didn't attend the shop classes. I didn't spend whole summers in Alsted when I was a kid, but we would be there for a week or so at a time. And as Heman's grandson, I had the good fortune to spend a lot of time with him in the mill and got to make many things in the shop. One year, I decided to make a chess set on a lathe, and I'm going to share a photo. Hopefully that's coming through. There's me as a young boy at the lathe, probably working on that chess set. I started with an ambitious scale, making chess pieces that were 6 inches to 8 inches tall, and I also decided to make the chessboard with a base of 3/4 inch plywood, which turned out to be quite heavy, since it was almost 3 feet square. My recollection is Heman did not dissuade me from using such a heavy piece of wood, but let me go ahead and find out for myself what the result would be. And in retrospect, I think as someone destined to be an engineer, there's no greater lesson than being able to make your own mistakes and learn from them. It seems that there were a lot of people who attended these classes and remember them fondly. It also seems that the classes were influential in different ways to different people. And so tonight we are going to have students, 4 people who were students in those classes, and have them share their memories. And 2 key topics that I think are interesting to explore with the panel are why is it important and valuable to learn to make things with your hands? And what can kids and adults get from this experience? And I think this is important as the association continues on its in its efforts to make the mill a living museum and an educational space. And then what was it about Heman and Edith's way of teaching that made the classes valuable and memorable to the students? So we have 4 shop students, Taffy Brown, Linda Dewing, Jim Pecora, and Tom Nostrand. We will go through a bit of a discussion. We hope to have time at the end for other people to share memories of the shop classes if you attended, or to ask questions. So I want to start out just by asking our panelists about their experiences of how they got involved in the classes and how they were run. Taffy, maybe we can start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in the classes and what it was like.
Well, I'm not exactly sure how we got started in the classes, but I do know that my sister, my 2 brothers, and I started the classes probably 1957, maybe 1958, when I was 12 or 13 years old. I remember being kind of apprehensive myself about joining the classes because I didn't know if, and at that time there weren't really classes. It was a class that just the 4 of us were in. I didn't know if Heman wanted the girls in the class or just would the class be just for boys. But all 4 of us were welcomed. Now, when I entered high school a couple of years later, being a girl, I was not allowed to take any of the industrial art classes, and I was shocked. But I never felt anything like that with the classes that I took. Heman was always welcoming.
Okay, thanks. And maybe now, Jim, we could move to you, and maybe before you start, I'd like to share another photo that we have here. Just for context, there's Jim Pecora standing with the apple-shaped chopping block with Heman there. So Jim, tell us about how you got involved in the classes.
Well, I was there every summer of my life, and obviously the youngest years I don't necessarily recall as much, but I believe I started at 1969 at about 9 years old. I was in shop class with some of the older students than myself. Just speaking for my brother, I know he couldn't get in. He was held off like a year, and that made an impression upon him when he started class. But I just remember going into class. I was in, I think that picture just showed Tom's older brother, Johnny, was in shop class, and his older sister, Jean, was in some of our shop classes. And from that picture, yeah, John Nostrom, he's right there. From that picture, I realized that this was taken in the winter time. So that means that we had shop classes other than the summer. I was often there for Thanksgivings and Christmases and other such holidays. We would be in the area as well. The only thing exciting about starting the shop class, the thing that was more exciting was when Heman allowed you the privilege of turning on the water power. And that didn't occur for me until I was probably about 12 or 13. And so it was a number of years of waiting and watching all the other kids sort of graduate ahead of you at turning on the water power and bringing the whole mill alive. That was probably the most exciting moments of any of the shop, was just bringing the power on.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Linda, maybe we'll go to you. And you spent summers in Alsted and
I did,
early
yes.
on. And
We
please
were
tell us a
an
little bit about your
academic-
experience.
Sorry. We were an academic family, so my mother and my sisters and I were able to come up here. My father came up weekends on the train from Cambridge, Mass. And I didn't have the same problem you had, Taffy, because our school that I went to in Cambridge had a shop class for kids. We were a co-ed school through the 4th grade, and 3rd and 4th graders had a shop class with a wonderful gentleman who was kind and gentle in some of the same ways that Heman was. So I felt quite at home in the idea of that, or at least I think I did. I don't remember any discomfort about that at all. But I was going to say that one of the things that struck me the most, I think, was the sensory quality of it all, more than any specific thing that Heman did or said or taught us or that we learned. It was the fact that we were smelling these wonderful wood chips and the water from downstairs, and we were hearing all the belts flapping in the motion of going around, and the noise of the whirring engines, and the sight of wood chips piling up and everything. It was an extremely vital, lively experience, and I think that's one of the most important things about it, really, and something that carries on to the future for us. We live in a two-dimensional world now, and we don't get those kinds of incredibly profound sensory experiences very often.
Thank you, Linda. And I think I want to come back to that a little bit more later in the discussion, because I think that's really interesting. Tom, you joined the shop classes after a long line of siblings, and it seems like it was almost obligatory, but a good experience. Tell us about your joining the class or classes. We have Tom still?
He may have dropped off.
Uh-oh.
He's on mute.
Sorry about that, I was on mute. So my involvement in the class, I think it was a requirement because of all my other siblings had attended, and I don't think there was any option there. We all went to Heman's classes. I think for the most part, our family, since we were full-time residents, did go. I never went in the summer. I always went in the fall or the winter, which was spotty, I think, depending on weather and stuff. But I definitely remember warming up around the wood stove in there in the shop. And I think that our family was 9 kids. So the earliest was 1960, and I was the last, which was probably 1971, 72. I was probably 8 or 9-ish. And so, yeah, for me, it wasn't an option, but it turned out to be a great thing.
Tom, maybe you can keep going and tell us what you remember about Heman's way of teaching the class and
Yeah,
his manner.
yeah, I think that for me and my memory, and I, now looking back at it, I was pretty amazed at how he could keep us all busy with such a diverse group of kids with different skill levels, different interests, different projects. There was a lot of older kids, but there was a lot of younger ones, and I was probably one of the younger ones in my class. But he did an amazing job managing it. He was so patient, although he had, he was strict, but not to the point where you thought he was over strict. It just seemed he was such a natural teacher.
When you say he was strict about something, how did that manifest itself? Maybe you can expand on that.
I think, thinking about the shop space and how dangerous it could be depending on what you were doing, and with the commotion of lots of projects and kids and stuff, I don't ever remember anyone getting hurt. So I think, he had a gentle way of instilling safety in the shop that, at the time, I didn't really think much of it. I always thought him as very gentle and patient, and not with a lot of firmness. But honestly, that combination worked, because nowadays in a shop similar to this, or in in the way it was then, you'd never be able to run a shop that way, with freewheeling belts and pulleys and things that you can get your hands stuck in easily.
I believe your brother John relayed a story about wanting to use the lathe and Heman thinking he was not old enough.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, he claims he's the youngest lathe operator through Chase's mill, but he's a good storyteller. So I'm not sure that's true, but yeah, he was hesitant to let, younger people on some of these tools that, if you're not really paying attention and you're not trained properly, that, you can get hurt. So he was very careful about that. And he did eventually teach John at a pretty young age, but he did it as a one-on-one lesson to make sure that, the safety and precautions were taken.
I remember myself being fascinated by the lathe, but also knowing that the emphasis was always learning how to use hand tools before using power tools. And so of course there was no hand powered lathe, but with saws and things like that. So I always used the hand tools first. Let's see, Linda, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your memory of Heman's teaching style and how he made people comfortable and inspired people.
I think one of the amazing things about Heman was that he was an amazing listener. And we were children. He listened to us as intently and carefully as he would have listened to the president or something, it seemed to me. He was very attentive and very thoughtful, and he was always extremely gentle and careful in how he responded. He didn't, I think you had mentioned this, Jonathan, too. He didn't say, no, don't do that, or that's a crazy idea, or I want you to do it this way. He sort of led us to find out for ourselves how we needed to do it and to make changes as we went along. If there was something that wasn't quite coming out the way we imagined, which of course happens, especially when you're starting out. So it was that quality of patience and gentleness and attentiveness that I thought was so remarkable.
And I saw a question while somebody was speaking about what Heman's profession was. And I saw it come and go, so I don't remember who sent it, but he was a land surveyor. And I think that's a profession that's very methodical and requires patience, and so it's not surprising, I think, that he had that demeanor. Jim, do you have anything you remember about Heman's way of dealing with the kids?
At just listening to Tom and Linda and others, that Heman had an innate ability to judge the kids. It was I think mostly all Heman's decisions on whether you were ready to use begin shop classes, number one, or ready to use some of this equipment. I liked what Linda had to say about the noise and that tactile, not only tactile environment, but the noise. And one of the skills that you had to learn was how to block all that noise out and focus on what you were doing. If you were using a jigsaw, you had to pay attention. You couldn't let the wood get away from you. So you had to either clamp it or hold it tight. The one piece of equipment that, in addition to what Tom was saying, the planer for me was always off limits. And I think that was one of those pieces of equipment where I believe the wood came out near the front door, but for some reason, if the planer was on, you could never stand near that front door entry area. That was just a big no-no. But yeah, how Heman kept all of 4 or 5 of us in line on different pieces of equipment. As I think back on it, Tom, you're right. It'd be very hard to do that, recreate that same environment today.
Thanks, Jim. Taffy, I think you had talked about uh, gaining a lot of confidence through the classes. Um, can you talk about that?
Well, I want to go back and talk a little bit about what I remember about Heman. Heman never moved fast. He always moved a bit slowly with a lot of welcoming intention. That really interested me. Nowadays, you see people moving much faster and speaking faster, but he never did. He was always very thoughtful, and he was always consistent. He was reassuring, he was very supportive and encouraging, and he gave praise where it was deserved. You know, Heman always started our classes with a handshake. And one of the funniest things I remember is he inspected my fingernails before class. Well-groomed, short fingernails were necessary for working with tools, he said. I thought, that's interesting that somebody would start a class looking at your fingernails. Now, go back, what did you want to know, Jonathan?
Well, I think you had said that you gained some confidence in your own abilities through these classes.
I don't remember that.
Oh, maybe I misremembered that.
I don't remember in particular. I do remember his really telling us about the tools and teaching us where they were stored, how to keep them. I gained a lot of respect for tools from him. I do know that.
And we had talked earlier about that handshake. I think I don't remember if it was you or somebody else saying it was at the beginning of the class and the end of the class, and
So it was at the end.
And maybe what did you make of that, or what do you make of that now? The significance of the handshake.
There was a lot of respect that was shown for each individual, and a handshake to me was showing respect. It was something that was brand new for me. It was a skill actually I learned from Heman, and he did this up until right before he died. If I happened to run into him someplace, always he greeted me, he greeted anybody I saw with a handshake and a few very nice, kind words, always.
And maybe Taffy, while you're talking, we can shift into the next topic, which is some favorite projects. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about your horse barn?
Well, I don't know if I want to talk about that now.
Oh.
What I would like, when are you going to talk about when Edith came along? I can talk about my horse barn now.
Well, no, that's fine. Most of the stories that we've heard are about Heman. Tell us about Edith's involvement.
Okay. I don't know how many classes we took. It must have been 3 or 4 years of classes we took. And the classes got larger and larger with more and more students. And I think that Edith got very concerned about safety and the number of students. So there was one summer that I remember in particular, when the shop classes had too many students. Edith came down and became a co-teacher with Heman, but also Ed Bly came down, and Ed Bly was upstairs. When there are lots of students, it was suggested that some of us go upstairs and do art projects or drawing projects with Ed Bly. And also, my family, I wanted to put in too, were delighted by doing weaving, band weaving. We did lots and lots of belts and band weaving. We did card weaving, Inkaloom weaving, and rope making. And Arsino Allen, Edith's cousin, was the one who taught us the card weaving. So a few years after we began our shop classes, it kind of spread out into different areas of the mill and into the community, that there were different things that were being taught when too many students would come to the classes, and it wouldn't be quite as safe as it was with fewer.
And do you remember, Edith, what she would
No,
teach?
I don't remember that because I was always filtered out of the classes by
Okay.
that time, and she was there. But I think ostensibly what she did mostly that I saw was work on her own projects with an eye out to the side to help others.
Uh-huh.
The teaching was very, very subtle. They were there for you and they taught you, but it was mostly that you were learning yourself by using the tools. In the beginning, there were patterns to be used when you were first starting, and often a stool was one of the first things that was made. There was always a pattern for that, and they would help each student start their project, select their materials, and then instruct them on how to cut the pieces out. I do want to say something about the classes. Somebody referred, and I forgot who it was. There was a lot of talk about the wood lathe. And the wood lathe area, the metal lathe, and the water-powered planer were all Heman's territory. But the rest of the shop, we were allowed to use whatever was in that area. And we learned where things were stored. We learned to respect our tools, how to take care of them, to put them away. Oh, I want to go back. I forgot one thing. When I was talking about the weaving, what I have on right now, I thought I would wear because some people might not know what band weaving is. And even to this day, I do it on an inkle loom. And if there's anybody watching who's curious about this or would like to do this later on sometime next year, next summer, just give us a call and let us know. I also happen to have a package of cards for the card weaving, amazingly enough, with the warp wrapped around the cardboard cards. So we're all set to go if anybody would like to carry on the tradition of making
Okay.
belts or lanyards or halters or dog leashes, whatever.
All right. Great. And then you mentioned stools, and I think we have a picture of one that you made.
That's right. And that was a pattern from a pattern that Heman had.
And now can we hear about your horse barn?
Well, yes, you can. My horse barn was
Yeah.
my first independent project that I made when I was 16 years old. It
And
was
here
a
we
horse
go. Here's
it-
the picture of the horse barn.
for my stuffed horse. I loved designing that barn and then building it. Heman helped cut the siding for that barn. And if you look down underneath the door on the gable end, you'll see a piece of siding came off. The siding was only about, I'd say, 1/8 of an inch thick, maybe 1/8 of an inch thick or so. And Heman did the cutting of the siding for that barn because it was too delicate on the saw. I was too young to do that. So he did that part for me. I think he was as proud of that barn as I was when it was finished. And from then on, whenever he introduced me to anyone new, it was always as Taffy Brown, my first shop student. And this barn has been played with by my nephews. It now houses my router and my little stuffed horse. It's still there. So you never can tell.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Taffy. Maybe,
I see.
Yeah.
I don't know if this started out as a pattern, but when I was up in the room upstairs the other day, I did see that there was another little barn up there. So it may have been from a pattern, except that I did the whole design. but using that kind of siding on it, and having the roof that came off to put the hay in the top. And I had a tack room in there that I made tack for my horse with. Oh, it was fantastic to be allowed to design something for myself.
I love that little horse barn. It's wonderful. Let's see, Linda, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your matchbox.
It's
And-
not nearly as exciting as the horse barn.
Well,
It was quite sweet. I think it was a design that Heman thought of to keep matches in for the kitchen stove. So it has a little lift up lid, and inside you can put those large, 2-inch long matches. And on the front, you could cut off the piece of the scratch board on the side, from the side of the matchbox, and stick it on there. Or you could also replace that with some sandpaper. And it meant quite a lot of cutting and fitting and sanding to make sure that it fits snugly. And so I made that. I don't remember at all how old I was when I was in these classes. It had to be in the 50s, but I just don't remember my age or which year it was. But we still use that matchbox here in our house in East Alsted, and it's by the stove and it's filled with matches. And periodically I put a new piece of sandpaper or a matchbox scratcher on the side to use for the matches, on the front, I should say.
thank you. I think it's quite charming. And then Jim, you had sent a couple of pictures. Do you want to talk about a project? And I have a couple of pictures. I have a chair.
Bring up the little chair first.
Okay, here we go.
So this is the basics. This is a very rudimentary stool. Okay, just looking at the bottom portion of this. And again, you can see how the template had changed from Taffy's, which was a bit more exotic. But anyway, my brother made this in 1962 because I was born in 60. And in summer shop class, I'd been a year and a half, and he made it for a seat for me. So it was his idea to add the sides and the back to the basic stool recipe. So this is something that I want to donate to the mill when there's an appropriate place, maybe upstairs or something, that it can be housed and looked at. And it is autographed. Well, it's not autographed, but it is inscribed in the bottom that, yeah, Donald, for my baby brother, 1962. Donald was 10. So that was really cool.
Wow.
The other topic that I think some of us wanted to explore was what the influence that these shop classes have had on our lives. And
yeah, that was the next topic. So we can, well, actually, I just want to show one more. Let's move to that next. But Tom had also sent a picture of quite an ambitious project that one of his brothers made. And I just want to show that. I can get it. There we go.
Wow.
Tom, tell us just a little bit about this this armoire.
The rustic armoire. Sure. So my brother George built it, which he's my oldest brother, and it was probably early 60s. And the funny thing is George is about the least handiest person that I know. And and somehow he built this. I got a feeling my brother Bill might have been involved, who was very handy, and a lot of help from Heman. But it actually was a piece that we used in the cupola house and when we moved into the dance hall. And then it moved to my brother's house. And then a few years ago, I ended up with it. So I actually have it. And yeah, it's quite a nice functional piece. It's got shelves below and a couple of drawers, and then the shelves on the top. Yeah.
Very nice. Elegant. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to Jim. You were about to tell us how did the shop classes influence you later in life, and why do you feel that they were important?
Well, it fits into the working with our hands. And so much of, I think, what we'd all like to see the mill bring back for other generations or future generations is that tactile, hands-on approach to education, because traditional schooling didn't provide it other than athletics, perhaps, and shop classes. You know, we called it industrial arts in the school that I went to. But you know, most of the learning was books and memorization and tests and things like that. And that form of learning didn't interest me whatsoever. So I tell people to this day that I grew up on Long Island, but I did all my growing up in East Alston. And it probably influenced me tremendously. I went away from working with my hands, getting a degree in electrical engineering, and then going off into support and sales. And only about 5 years ago came back to working with my hands now with lapidary tools. So I have 5 diamond. I've just traded the saws, the teeth of the saws from metal to diamonds. A little bit more expensive, but I have over 14 motors in my shop right now that run all different types of equipment. And I'm back to working with my hands and creating gemstones from our local stones and others around the world. And I'm so much happier than doing not working with my hands. So can I just talk about also this is about it's not pride. Well, when you're in middle school and everything's awkward and you have all these other people that you really don't know, being able to impress somebody or make an impression boosts your morale. That's what I would say, morale. And so when I went into the industrial arts program, I embarked on a lathe project that astounded the teachers as well as the other students. And for a middle school kid, that was huge. And you could show the picture. This lamp is by my bed to this day, and it'll stay there till I die. You got that one there, Jonathan?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't quite prepared, but there we go. There's the lamp.
So, and it was, you know, kind of an advanced feature to make the base for it. It's kludgy. It's kind of fat, like I was as a kid, but I was really proud of that.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
You know, can I?
Go ahead, Taffy.
Doing these projects, a project that you make for yourself with your very own hands, Jim just hit on. It can get very emotional because it's you, it belongs to you, it's your thing. You can give it away as a gift or you can keep it, but there's something about making a piece with one's hands that helps in more ways than people can believe. It helps emotionally in these rocky times we have, to be able to sand a piece of wood, to make something, to make a teeny tiny piece and hold it in your hand. It's yours, it's sensual. There's just an otherworldly part of one's life that can be found in working with hands. Thank you.
Completely agree, Taffy. And I think you said something the other day when we were talking about making matters. And I just love that.
Matters.
Because creating something, you look at it, you remember the process. Was it perfect? No. Did you do this remarkable Michelangelo kind of thing? No. It's not about that at all. It's about finding the connection in yourself between your eyes and your hands and what's in front of you, and realizing that that's something that you did. It's very, very moving.
Making can be magic.
And Taffy, I think that's a wonderful segue. Can I now show you the picture of your house raising?
Yes.
Because I think this is, and you can tell us a little bit about, you had mentioned the similarity of your barn to this house, but you took on a very ambitious project with this house.
I've got to put my earphones are falling out. Wait a minute. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I never would have thought that 46 years after I took first shop class with Heman, I would be doing the working frame drawings for a timber frame house of my own design, using wood from trees off my own property for a workshop on timber framing that was being given by Benson Woodworking, where I was then working. I never would have imagined that my house would be so similar to the little horse barn I made in Heman's shop when I was 16 years old. There's always a surprise. One never knows where a tiny little experience will lead later on in life.
Kathy, is that right in Alsted?
Yes, I'm an Alstead Center. Indeed.
That's wonderful.
You know, who would have imagined that? I certainly never would have imagined that something like this would have happened. And when this whole idea of this program tonight came up, I thought, wow, there I was 46 years later, myself teaching and being part of another woodworking project that was much larger, that was larger than life, as large as life. And it's my first and only house. And it was the hardest design project. I did timber frames for a while. It's the hardest design project I ever did because of the limitations I had, which were financial and time. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of tears in there because I couldn't get out. I had to keep within the parameters of what I could do, was able to do, could afford to do. And time was super important. And that's terribly difficult to do on a construction job. I worked on the timing for this for a whole year and designed. When I worked with the chopper who cut the logs, I worked with the forester to pick out the trees. I told the chopper to cut the trees long so that I would have extra wood on the end of the timbers to do this. But yes, Jim, it's in Alstead for sure. And it's very, very representative of Alstead, very representative of the mill, of the community efforts. I would not have been able to do this job without the help of my colleagues, my friends, my neighbors. It's a community project.
It clearly looks like it from all the people standing on the frame. It looks wonderful. I want to thank you. I want to move on before we run out of time, so we can hear from the others. Linda, I'd like to come back to the comment that you were making about texture, and you can tell us a little bit about how the classes translated into the work in sculpture and art that you did later.
That's a tall one. It was not a very direct path for me. I think some part of me knew that I wanted to be an artist, but it didn't seem to fit into life very well for some reason. I remember having a discussion with my parents when I was in high school about wanting to go to Rhode Island School of Design, which incidentally I knew absolutely nothing about at all. I knew nothing about art schools. I hadn't looked into any of this. I just had some inkling I wanted to go there. And they said rather cautiously that they thought it'd be a good idea to go get a liberal arts education first. And then if I wanted to go to art school, I could do that. So I was sort of docile and I really didn't know what I was thinking about, I don't think. So I went to college, and some years later I did get into art, and it was very interesting because I was living in a community, a small community, bigger than East Alstead, but not huge, out in the Midwest. And there was an artist that I got to know whose name was Gretchen. And she was very creative and very original. And she started offering some classes. And I thought, oh, I'd like to do that. You know, there were painting classes. So we started doing these different things. And then I decided that I really wanted to do a portrait of another friend. And I got this enormous canvas. It was like 6 feet wide. I'd never done anything like it in my life. I had no idea what I was doing, but she was sort of like Heman. She encouraged you wherever you were. So I started painting this picture of my friend. And then I realized that I had no notion of what part of his face and torso, you know, really went in and what went out and how you would portray that on the flat surface. I just had absolutely no idea whatsoever. So then I thought, well, what I really need to do is study more about the human beings and the body and how it works and sculpture. And so I found a place to do that. And I was just, I felt as if I'd just come home to something that was enormously meaningful to me. And I think it was an indirect passage from those experiences with Heman where we were making three-dimensional things and thinking three-dimensionally in wood. And I did love wood. So subsequently, I made another wood piece, which I think Jonathan has a picture of. And I've just recently, that was about 20 years ago, I've just recently come back to wood again. Those same connections, I think, way back in the mill days. It's a very living substance. In the interim, I had worked in a bronze casting foundry and worked a lot with bronze, which I also love because it holds the light in a different way from wood. And it's also a very vital substance. The wood is unique, and of course, each wood is unique. So I guess that's the best I can recreate. I don't really know how it came into place, but that's what happened.
Well, thank you. I mean, what struck me as we were talking about that earlier was that it seemed like the classes gave you a feel for working with material and an appreciation for the material that sort of came through as you were working in sculpture.
I might just
okay.
add one thing if I could. There's a wonderful sort of saying that a laborer works with his or her hands, a craftsperson works with his or her hands and head, and an artist works with his or her hands, head, and heart. And I've always liked that.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, we're almost out of time. I want to get to Tom. Tom, you had talked about a barn that you built and applying some of the skills you learned. Tell us about how the shop classes influence your later life.
Yeah, well, I think myself and all my siblings grew up and we all took classes with Heman and Edith. And part of that was we always made gifts for each other for Christmas and birthdays. And so we'd all, at an early age, started working with our hands, and owing most of that to Heman and Edith. Their family was not, my parents were not very hands-on type people. So having neighbors that were Heman and Edith, it was amazing. So for really myself and pretty much most of my siblings, we've always had kind of a love of working and making stuff ourselves, which led me to, I've renovated several houses and done a lot of different woodworking projects. And my daughter was into horses and my wife, and so I built a horse barn. And I cut the trees on our land, and I had a portable mill come in and cut the beams and all the planks and stuff. And I spent 1 year just doing all the chiseling and the mortise and tenon work and all the braces and everything else. And then the following year I was with some friends, put it up, went up quite nicely. And my guide for this was Jim Gruber and Ted Benson's book, which I had never done post and beam work. And I bought their book, and it's an awesome book. I wouldn't have known what to do without it. But so I work in that barn daily on projects. We no longer have horses. My daughters have grown and moved away. So it's a shop for all kinds of different things. And my company is 20 chickens in one of the horse stalls.
Right. That's great. Okay, so we are just about out of time. And I hope everyone has enjoyed hearing these stories. As the restoration of the mill continues, we really want to bring back the kind of learning opportunities for kids and adults that those shop classes provided. And I think it's wonderful to hear about the ways that these things can influence people's lives, and I think it also gives people an appreciation, just working with your hands, appreciation for the things around us, and the skill and time that goes into making things that are made by hand. We need to wrap up. I want to thank all of our panelists. Really enjoyed all the stories. Thank you for taking the time and sharing. And thanks for everyone who joined us this evening. There are some upcoming events. Oh, and I hope this gives, for those of you who are supporting the association and the restoration of the mill, I think hopefully it helps show some of the value of what you're doing, how it's really important. So there's some upcoming events in this series. On October 27th, in the spirit of the presidential election and the importance of voting, we'll hear from Sharon Spalding, who has been researching and is working on a book about Mary Ware Dennett, an important suffragist, whose papers were stored in the attic of the house across the street from the mill, or across the road from the mill. And then in November, Noah Elbers from Orchard Hill Breadworks is going to give a demonstration of his modern grist mill and how he makes flour. And he'll also show us how to make one of his favorite breads. There'll be emails sent out about these events. And finally, we want to thank the New Hampshire Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities, who made this evening possible with a grant. So that concludes the program for this evening. It's scheduled to end at 9 o'clock, but for anybody who wants to stick around, we'd love to hear some more memories, other people's stories, or if there's questions. If you need to drop off, please feel free to do so, but we'll keep this going till about 9:15 for anybody who wants to stick around and hear some more stories or tell us some more stories. So with that, is there anybody who would like to tell us?
Jonathan, I have a.
Yeah.
Jonathan,
Go ahead.
hello, you talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wrote a little piece about my own experience, if you'll bear with me. I said one of my favorite things at the mill when I was a kid was, believe it or not, sweeping the floor. After a busy morning in the shop, we always cleaned up before going home for lunch. The floor would be covered with sawdust and chips, so sweeping was really satisfying. You really had something to show for it when you were done. But here's an event that really stands out as a teaching moment for me. At the age of about 12, I spent another busy morning in the mill with Dad and had begun to work on something. I think it was some kind of a box with enough complexity to it so that I was stumped by some aspect of joinery. So I went to the expert and I said, "Daddy, how do you do this?" Well, now any self-respecting school shop teacher would say, "This is how you do it," and would spell out the steps in a logical order. But Dad looked it over carefully and after a thoughtful pause said, "I don't know, but you'll think of something." At first I was disappointed and a little miffed that instruction wasn't happening. But in retrospect, I realized what a profound effect his remark had on me. He gave me license to be creative, to make mistakes. That's how we learn, and to trust my own instincts. My finished product might be imperfect in execution, but in the end, I would have learned something valuable. And as my mother would testify, you're never happier than when you hear yourself say, "I didn't know I could do that." Thank you.
Thanks. I like that story. It's wonderful.
like that story too. And one of the things I was going to say was, I remember and loved sweeping up and cleaning up after class because I liked the look and the feel of the floor. And always we swept the chips and the sawdust off the top of the workbenches onto the floor and then swept the whole thing over underneath the wood planer, the water powered wood planer.
That's right.
Big pile of chips that was there. It was wonderful. But the floor, I remember, the floor was amazing.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Was there some?
I had a couple of memories, if I'm not interrupting somebody.
Please go ahead, Nancy.
Well, just some of the discussion that got me, I was thinking, somebody talked about being old enough to rotate the wheel for the, to turn on the turbine. And once you've done that in your life, you never forget that feeling of power, right? I mean, I still remember when I describe it to people, it's like, you know what it's like to turn a mill on, it's as a kid, I knew how to turn a mill on, and I knew how you'd crank that thing and the whole building would shake and all the noise would happen. I also, somebody got me thinking about, I was barely old enough to go to some of the group shop classes. And I do remember going to a group shop class, but I was probably just because I was a grandchild. And I, for years, had the little box I made. But I remember my grandmother making spoons, and somebody tonight gave me what I forgot which one of you said. It seemed like Edith always just had her own project, but was keeping an eye out. Because I was thinking, I remember when I was a kid, like, why is she making a wooden spoon? She has plenty of spoons at home. And now I understand she was just doing something to stay busy and keep her eye out without seeming like she was hovering. I had never put that together before. I also do remember them telling me stories of people who got hurt. And I don't know if they got hurt there, but I have never forgotten that I have to tie my hair back around any of those power tools because, that could get caught. They didn't yell, but they explained how your hair could get in the jigsaw or in the lathe, and that would be the end, I knew
The end of the hair, not the end of you, hopefully.
Maybe you too, right? Your head would get in. I can't, I'll never forget that image that I got from them.
I would love to.
Can I add to that,
what you're
Jonathan?
saying. Oh, go ahead, Margaret.
I would like to expand on Nancy's point about Edith not hovering. My favorite picture of her is standing looking at a child who's working at a workbench, a low workbench, and her hands are behind her back. She is not participating in what the kid is doing at all. But she's ready with a suggestion in case he gets stuck on his idea. But it's important to her that he carry on his own idea as far as he's able. And in the same light, Dad would always wanted a kid to follow his own direction, his own idea. And when David Crosby came to the middle class one day, he wanted to make a gun rack for his father. And guns were absolute anathema to our father. Mm-hmm. Well, but David made his gun rack because it's that important that a child follow his own idea. Yeah. Now, I'd also like to speak on something that Tom said earlier, that most kids actually were winter attendees to the shop classes. And sometimes in the summer especially, there would be so many kids, it was just too many for safety or anything else. And I remember Dad saying to some of the winter kids once, there are some kids here who are just here in the summer. And right now is their time, their chance to come to the mill. The rest of you have that chance the rest of the year. Would you be willing to call it off for the summer and come again next fall? And he was able to get complete cooperation from the kids. So fairness and an opportunity for other people was very much on his mind.
I'd love to add one thing that we haven't mentioned, and I don't think it was really part of the classes, but it was so part of Heman and so part of the mill. I'm sure most of you remember it too. Heman had set up down below a little water wheel, and I guess a generator. I don't remember how it worked, but there was this magic that happened that the water created light. He pushed a little switch and the water wheel activated and this little light bulb lit up. And it was so powerful to think of this, of how that worked, not necessarily technical. I'm not an engineer. Some of the rest of you would have a better idea about that. But the magic of seeing that light come on as the water went around the wheel was, I'll never forget it. I've told it so many times to so many people because it was so compelling.
Yeah.
I think we've been in the process of setting that up again, right? Who has the details on that?
Right.
Tom, you do, don't you?
Tom, where did he go?
I'm not-
Tom's, you're muted,
Oh,
Tom.
here he is. Tom, you're muted.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. Yeah, so that generator that you were talking about, I think it's the one you were talking about that had a couple of light bulbs attached to it, is down and running again, down in the basement there. And that generator came from like a 1954 Buick, and it still works after sitting down there for so long.
Wow.
So it's kind of neat to resurrect it.
Tom, I have a question for you. Can you explain to me how the power gets stored in those batteries that are behind?
Sure, yeah, it's so the newer generator is actually an alternator, and it again is it's a common alternator from a car. So it's very similar to your car. Basically there's enough energy from the turbine that spins the alternator, and it generates power and charges the battery, and it has the capacity to really light a couple of floors worth of lighting as well. So, yeah.
Are those car batteries?
They're actually deep cell batteries, so they're not car batteries. Car batteries don't like to be drawn down much. They're heavily used and heavily charged. These are more lightly. You can basically empty them of their charge and it won't damage them. So it's, yeah, so they don't charge as fast, and they can't discharge as fast as a car battery, but they'll last much longer in that application.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have any other any other stories?
Can I jump in for a second? This is Pat Spur.
Yes, please.
I just have one. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I just have one memory of a class that I took. It must have been about 1960. And I don't think I was interested in the lathe, so I never found out whether I could use it, but I wanted to make a sailboat, and I must have used a bandsaw. And I produced the sailboat that, was just a sailboat, and I made a mast and that kind of thing. Then I realized it needed a keel. So when I took it home that day, I found a piece of gutter, I think, a piece of metal, and flattened it out and cut it out, probably on our grandmother's grinding wheel, the kind that you do with your feet. And then I cut 3 panels in the bottom and bent 2 in one direction and 1 in the other, and screwed it on. And then I took it back the next week and showed it to Heman. And I don't know if he was actually that pleased, but he'd made such a big deal of it. I was just so chuffed that he, he was so encouraging, thinking, oh, you figured this out by yourself, and a nice thing. And I ended up leaving it there, actually. He had it sitting in the window for a long time. But it was just so encouraging of, dumb kids trying to figure out, stealing a piece of gutter from their grandmother to make a keel for a sailboat. But that was
I do remember
that was a fun memory.
couple of sailboat models in the mill when I was a kid. So probably one of them was yours.
Might have been. It wasn't very beautiful. It had little dowels that I used for the, the boom and that kind of thing, but it was painted.
Uh-huh.
And the keel was a piece of metal that was not graceful, but stayed on anyway. I don't know if I remember. I don't know if I tried floating it in the rain barrel or anything. Anyway, that's my memory, is that just how encouraging Heman was, and how, he always looked for something good in what you made, even though, most of the time I was just whittling horses. But it was such a fun person.
My experience with his encouragement was that he would never get really effusive in his approval. He would also never really be harshly critical. I mean, he would let you know if something could be done in a different way. But I always could count on his judgment being honest. And if he thought that I did a sort of so-so job on something, he'd look at it and say, "Oh, well, yes." But he never would compliment, never tell me I'd done a great job if I hadn't, and I knew that. And but if I had, he would say, "Well, that's really good." So that it was that honesty, I think, that was valuable and impressed me.
I saw a hand raised, Bobby Spur.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of say what I remember. I was a little young to handle the shop things, although I do remember all the tours of the mill. But what I really remember was Heman Chase's character. And I remember it very striking that he was such a leader of all of us children, and his integrity as just a very good human. And what I remember one time was when he took my father, and I think many of us, maybe Pat, you remember this. He took us, and Ed, you may remember this, but he took us to that place on Prentice Hill. And it reminded me of him, because I don't know if you all saw this, but there was etched in that
This
rock.
is almost over.
There was etched in that rock the word paradise. And I don't know if you all remember that, but it was on a low area. And it was one of the most striking memories of my childhood that Heman almost stood for that in my heart, because he was such a good teacher for all of us.
What a wonderful memory.
That was done by the hermit that lived there after the hurricane of 38.
Is that right?
Really?
Yeah.
Where did you learn that, Jim?
Oh, my mom knew all sorts of history. Yeah, she was a history buff.
Well, my mother said nobody knew that. Nobody knew who had carved that.
Huh.
And wasn't it after the 38 hurricane, where all the trees were down and so on, that it disappeared? I mean, she knew before the hurricane that it was there. And then it was later that she was trying to show some people where it was. She told them about it, but she said, "We don't know where it is anymore." And somebody pushed some leaves aside and said, "Well, here it is."
Heman knew where it was, Ellen.
Well, I guess he was lost to everybody, I think, for a bit. But,
Yes,
I might have that wrong.
Yeah. It's still there, though. We can assure you that.
And Bobby Spur, whose parents were yours?
William and Hallie, and Sophie was my grandmother.
Oh, yes, because I was a babysitter for some of you kids. And I remember you terrified, well, I don't know if it was you, but either you or your cousins terrified me by tightrope walking on the beams in the barn. And I was responsible for the survival of these kids.
I think we all did that.
You all did that, probably.
Back to the mill and Heman. Heman was growing up when the present mill building was being built by his stepfather, Hartley Dennett. So he grew up with the mill itself, a building. And so you can tell that you can just see how tightly, how really tightly a part of that whole mill and thought and outlook he was a part of. And Hartley encouraged him greatly and argued with him at times, and so on. We have a wonderful record of that in family letters, where when Dad was away at school, he would demand to hear what's going on in the mill. And so the progress of that, he followed intricately forever. And so, and you know, the mill was just, it was in his heart, and he wanted to share it in that way with everyone else. And I guess we can tell from the contributions here this evening that he succeeded very well.
And Margaret, you're working to publish those letters?
Well, I am putting together the story of building the mill, that's what I'm calling it, just from the excerpts of those letters. And Ellen is putting pictures into it now, and the diagrams that they drew in those letters to explain, here's what I think we should do. And Hartley would say, well, that's an idea. Well, but I think I'm going to do it that way. And Heman would argue with the expert. Didn't bother him a bit.
I finally got a chance to open and take a look at the draft just yesterday. So I look forward to reading more of those.
Yes, good.
So it's 1:15, and I've really enjoyed hearing everybody's stories. It's really been wonderful and great to see all these wonderful familiar faces and unfamiliar faces. So
Thanks
you,
for doing all
everybody.
this.
And thank you, Sharon, for organizing, and thank you, Bryony, for organizing.
Thank you, Jonathan, for doing such a great job as a moderator. And thanks everyone for your stories. It's been so amazing to hear.
Thank you
forward
all.
Thank
to
you
the next
all.
event.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye,
Have a
everyone.
good night.
Great to see you all, you family. Great to see you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye,
Have a good
everyone.
night.
Great to see you all, you family. Great to see you.
Bye.
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 Bye.